You would swear you already know the shape of the space around you. There are 3 directions: left and right, forward and back, up and down. Every way you could ever move folds neatly into those 3, and there is simply no 4th one to find. You have looked your whole life, and it was never there. But here is the part they left out. You have never once seen those 3 dimensions. The back of your eye is a flat sheet. Every image that lands on it is flat, and the solid world you are so certain of is something your brain quietly builds out of flat shadows after the fact. You do not see depth, you compute it. And once that is true, everything you assumed about a 4th direction comes apart in your hands. A being standing in one could see inside your locked safe and your sealed chest at the same instant, and lift the ring from your closed fist without ever opening your hand. A whole other world could hang a hair's breadth from your face, in a direction your body cannot turn to face. Settle in and hit subscribe if you are new here, because by the end of this, the plain, solid room around you will feel less like something you see and more like something you were told. Now, let's slowly ease into this. Part 1. The 3 directions you would swear by. Take a slow look around the room you are in right now and notice how certain you are about the shape of the space holding you. There is left and there is right. There is forward and there is back. There is up and there is down. Every direction you could possibly point, every way you could possibly move, folds neatly into some combination of those 3. You can walk diagonally, you can climb a staircase, you can reach across a table, and no matter how you slice that motion, it comes apart into length, width, and height. 3 numbers locate anything. 3 directions contain everything. This feels less like a fact you learned, and more like a fact you were born knowing, the kind of thing too obvious to bother saying out loud. So when someone asks what a higher dimension would look like, the honest first reaction is a shrug. A higher dimension sounds like a phrase invented to move a story along, a doorway a character steps through to reach somewhere impossible. There is no 4th direction in this room. You have looked. You have lived your entire life inside these 3, and you have never once stumbled across a 4th way to turn. The question seems to answer itself before it is finished being asked, because higher dimensions do not look like anything. They are not here. And yet that confident dismissal is where the strangeness begins, because the question is not a piece of fiction. It is one of the most serious questions in modern physics, asked in plain earnest by the people who build our theories of gravity and matter, the people who have spent careers writing the equations that actually describe the universe. They take a 4th direction of space seriously. Some of them suspect it is real. And when you follow why, carefully, one step at a time, the easy dismissal does not survive the first move. The truth turns out to be far stranger than the science fiction you were dismissing, and far stranger than the certainty you were defending. The first crack in that certainty is so simple it sounds like a riddle, but it is plain anatomy. You have never once seen 3 dimensions. Not now, not ever, not for a single instant of your life. I do not mean that in some clever philosophical way, where the words get bent until they mean their opposite. I mean it as a fact about the equipment in your skull. The solid, 3-dimensional world you are looking at this very moment, the world you would swear you are perceiving directly, is not arriving in your mind whole. It is being built there, after the fact, out of something much flatter and much poorer than the world it represents. You think you are looking at depth. You are not. You are looking at something flat, and your brain is doing the rest in secret. Sit with how odd that is, because everything that follows grows out of it. The certainty you have about 3 dimensions, the certainty that makes a 4th one sound absurd, rests on a sense you do not actually have. You feel like a creature who sees space directly, who takes in the whole solid room at a glance, and from that feeling you conclude that if a 4th direction existed, you would surely have noticed it. But that feeling is a polished illusion. If you do not even perceive the third dimension directly, if the most ordinary depth in front of your face is a reconstruction rather than a sight, then your failure to notice a fourth direction proves nothing at all. It is not evidence of absence. It is just the limit of an instrument that was never built to do what you assumed it does. This is the thread we are going to pull on for the next couple of hours, slowly and without any rush, until the whole comfortable picture comes apart in your hands and something more beautiful is left behind. We are going to find out what a higher dimension would actually look like, and the answer is not a glowing portal or another world hanging in the sky. The answer is stranger and quieter than that, and it is grounded in real geometry and real physics, in the work of people like Edwin Abbott and Theodore Kaluza and Lisa Randall, people who pushed the question hard enough to get real answers back. We are going to build a fourth direction in the only place it can ever be built, which is in the structure of a careful argument, since the eyes will not cooperate. We are going to meet a being who could reach into a locked safe without opening it and lift your wallet out through a direction you cannot point to. We are going to find out that more dimensions does not mean more room, that it can mean dramatically less. And by the end, the most surprising thing will not be how alien a higher dimension is. It will be how much of one you already are. It is worth being honest at the outset about why this question refuses to go away, because you might reasonably suspect it is a parlor trick, a way of dressing up nonsense in mathematical clothes. It is not. The people who keep returning to higher dimensions are not mystics or storytellers. They are the physicists trying to write down how gravity works at the smallest scales, the ones trying to explain why gravity is so strangely feeble, the ones trying to unify the forces of nature into a single set of equations. And every time they push their best theories hard enough, the theories ask for more room than 3 dimensions can provide. The extra dimension is not something they want. In many ways, it is an embarrassment, a thing they would happily be rid of if the mathematics allowed. But the mathematics does not allow it. The equations keep handing back extra directions, the way a stubborn calculation keeps returning the same uncomfortable answer no matter how many times you redo it. That persistence is the reason a sober person should take the question seriously, even while keeping both feet on the ground. There is also a quieter reason the question matters, one that has nothing to do with equations. To ask what a higher dimension looks like is really to ask how much of the world you are actually in contact with, and how much you are simply assuming. It is to test the boundary between what you perceive and what you infer, between the reality out there and the model your mind builds of it. Most of us go through life never once examining that boundary, treating the seen world as the whole world. This question forces the examination. It takes the most basic fact you think you know, the shape of the space around you, and asks whether you have any direct access to it at all. The answer, as we are about to find, is humbling, and it changes the way every later piece of the story lands. But none of that lands unless we start where the certainty lives, which is in your own eyes, with the quiet fact that the solidity you trust most was never something you saw. It was something you were told by a brain that has been keeping the secret your whole life. So let us begin there, with the shadows behind your eyes, and see how far that single crack can spread. Part 2. The shadows behind your eyes. Picture the back of your own eye, the curved inner wall where seeing actually happens. That wall is called the retina, and it is a thin layer of light-sensitive cells lining the inside of the eyeball like wallpaper on the inside of a sphere. For the purpose of forming a picture, that layer behaves as a surface, a two-dimensional sheet. Light from the world is gathered by the lens at the front of your eye and focused onto that sheet, and what lands there is an image. The crucial thing about that image, the thing almost nobody stops to consider, is that it is flat. It is exactly as flat as a photograph. exactly as flat as the picture on a strip of film or the glowing rectangle of a screen. The three-dimensional world pours in through the front of your eye and is pressed onto a flat surface at the back, and that flattened smear of light is the only thing your eye actually delivers. Depth is not in that image. Read that sentence twice, because it is the hinge the whole topic turns on. The distance from you to the far wall, the roundness of an apple, the way one object sits in front of another, the solidity of a person standing across the room, none of that is measured by your eye. Your eye cannot measure it. Your eye is a flat sensor catching a flat picture, and a flat picture has no depth dimension inside it any more than a photograph does. When you hold a photograph of a mountain, the photograph does not contain the miles between the foreground and the peak. Those miles have been crushed flat. Your retina does the same crushing to the entire world, every waking second, and hands the flattened result inward. So where does the depth come from? Your depth, the vivid three-dimensional solidity you are experiencing as undeniable fact right now, is reconstructed. It is built by your brain, after the image arrives, out of a handful of clues. Your two eyes sit a couple of inches apart, so each one catches a slightly different flat picture, and your brain compares the two and uses the difference to estimate distance. When you move your head, nearer things slide across your view faster than far things, and your brain reads that sliding as depth. Familiar objects look smaller when they are far away. Edges overlap, shadows fall a certain way, and from this whole bag of tricks, your visual system constructs a model of a solid world and presents it to you. It presents it so smoothly, so instantly, so seamlessly that you never catch it working. You mistake the finished reconstruction for raw, direct sight. But it was never direct. You see in 2 dimensions, and you compute the third, and you have been doing it so flawlessly since before you could speak that the computation feels like nothing at all. Here is the rule hiding inside that fact, the rule that unlocks everything else, so let us state it plainly and carefully. Perception always happens 1 dimension below the thing being perceived. To see a 3-dimensional world directly, all at once and whole, you would need a 3-dimensional retina, a sensor that filled space rather than lining a surface. You do not have one. No creature built like you has one. You have a flat sheet and a clever brain, and so the solid world reaches you only as flattened shadows plus a great deal of inference. The seer always lives 1 step behind the world it sees. This is not a quirk of human biology. It is a feature of what seeing is, and it will hold at every level we climb to. Now, turn that rule back on the question we started with. You wanted to dismiss a 4th dimension on the grounds that you would surely see it if it were there. But you do not see the 3rd dimension. You have never seen it. The depth of this room, the most obvious and trustworthy fact in your entire visual field, is a guess your brain assembled from 2 flat images. If even that is a reconstruction, then the wall standing between you and a 4th direction was never made of distance, and it was never made of evidence. It was made of the way you were built to see. A 4th direction could be running through this room right now, perpendicular to all 3 you know, and your flat retinas and your inferring brain would have no way whatsoever to register it. Not because it is far, because you are the wrong shape to catch it. Feel the floor tilt a little, because this is the first real loss of footing, and it is worth letting it land fully before we go on. The solidity, you would never think to doubt, the plain depth of the space around you, is already a kind of trick, a beautiful and reliable trick your brain plays so well that you forgot it was a trick at all. You are not a creature who sees space. You are a creature who receives flat shadows and dreams the space back into them. And once that is true, the question of a higher dimension stops being a question about whether you could ever see one. Because the answer to that is plainly no, you could not, just as you cannot really see the 3rd. It becomes a question about something much older and much stranger which is what it is like to be any creature anywhere, trapped behind senses that always run a dimension short, always inferring a world it can never look at straight on. Consider how strange it is that the illusion works as well as it does, because the seamlessness is itself a clue about how thoroughly you are kept in the dark. There is no flicker, no seam, no moment where you catch the reconstruction being assembled. You do not experience two flat images and then a conscious act of combining them. You simply open your eyes and there is a solid world, finished, immediate, undeniable, presented to you as raw fact. The enormous labor your visual system performs, the comparing and inferring and modeling, happens entirely below the level you can notice, and the result is handed up to you already complete, with all the scaffolding hidden. This is exactly why the illusion is so dangerous to clear thinking. It does not feel like an interpretation. It feels like the truth itself, arriving unmediated. And anything that feels that certain, that immediate, that beyond question is precisely the kind of thing worth doubting, because the strength of the feeling is no measure at all of how directly you are touching reality. Notice, too, that the same machinery can be fooled, which proves the point in a way you can test yourself. Every optical illusion, every drawing that seems to pop into depth on a flat page, every three-dimensional scene built convincingly on a flat screen, works by feeding your visual system the same flat clues it normally uses to reconstruct depth, and watching it dutifully build a solid world out of a surface that has none. A film is nothing but flat images, and yet you see into it, your brain constructing rooms and distances and bodies out of light on a flat sheet, because that is all it ever does, even when you look at the real world. The screen is not a special case. It is the ordinary case, made obvious. You have always been watching a kind of screen, painted on the backs of your eyes and dreaming the depth into it. That is a lonely thought, and also a thrilling one, because it means we are not as helpless as it first appears. A creature that cannot see a dimension can still reason its way toward it. It can still notice the pattern and ask what comes next. To learn how, we need to meet a creature even more trapped than we are, a creature with one fewer dimension to work with, living its whole life on a flat sheet, certain in exactly the way you were certain a moment ago. We need to visit Flatland. Part 3. A Visitor to Flatland. In 1884, an English schoolmaster named Edwin Abbott published a small, strange book with a small, strange title. He called it Flatland, and although he wrote it partly as a social satire of the rigid Victorian world around him, he accidentally produced the single best instrument anyone has ever built for thinking about higher dimensions. More than a century later, physicists and mathematicians still reach for it the moment they want to make the unimaginable feel close. So let us go where it points, and step down a level, into a world with one dimension fewer than our own. Imagine an infinite tabletop, a perfectly flat plane stretching out forever in every direction, and imagine that everything in this world lives strictly on that surface, with no thickness at all, like ink soaked into paper. The inhabitants are living geometric figures. There are line segments and triangles, squares and pentagons and circles, all sliding around on the flat surface, going about their lives. These are the Flatlanders, and the most important thing about a Flatlander, the thing you must hold on to, is what it means for them that their world is flat. They have left and right. They have forward and back. They do not have up and down. Those words are not merely unfamiliar to a Flatlander. They are unthinkable. There is no direction called up for them to fail to use. Ask a Flatlander to look up off the surface, and you are not asking something difficult. You are asking something that has no meaning at all inside their world, the way it has no meaning to ask you to point in a direction that is perpendicular to all three of yours. The idea does not just exceed them. It does not exist for them. Think about what a Flatlander can actually see. Light, in their world, travels along the surface. So a Flatlander, looking at another Flatlander, sees only the nearest edge, face on, as a line segment. They cannot see the whole shape of their neighbor from above, because there is no above. They reconstruct each other's shapes from clues, from brightness, and from the way the edges shorten and turn, exactly the way you reconstruct depth, by inference rather than direct sight. The rule we found behind your own eyes holds for them too, one floor down. Their perception runs a dimension behind their world. A Flatlander never sees a square hole. It sees an edge and works out the rest. Now here is the part that matters most, the part that will rise up one level and become the engine of everything that follows. A Flatlander cannot see inside a closed shape. Draw a square on the surface and place a single dot in the middle of it. To every creature in that plane, that dot is sealed away. It is walled off on all four sides, hidden as completely as the contents of a locked vault are hidden from you. No Flatlander can see the dot. No Flatlander can reach the dot. To get to it, a Flatlander would have to cross one of the four walls, break through the square, because in a flat world, the only way into an enclosed region is through its boundary. The dot is safe. The dot is secret. The dot is, by every law the Flatlanders know, utterly unreachable without forcing the walls. And now let a visitor arrive. Let a three-dimensional being, one of us, drift down toward that flat world, hovering just above the surface, looking down. From up here, everything changes, and it changes in a way no Flatlander could ever anticipate. From above, that sealed square is not sealed at all. You are looking straight down at the dot in its center, and you can see it perfectly, because you are looking at it from a direction the walls do not block, a direction that is simply not among the ones the walls were built to stop. The walls rise up around the dot within the plane, but you are not in the plane. You are above it. The fourth wall, the one that would have to be a ceiling to hide the dot from you, does not exist, because the Flatlanders never imagined needing one. There is no such thing as a closed room to you. Every interior in that entire world lies open beneath your gaze at once. It gets stranger. You do not just see the dot. You can reach down with a finger, touch the dot, and lift it straight up, out of the plane, and set it down somewhere else. You never crossed a single wall. You never broke the square. You simply moved the dot in a direction the Flatlanders do not have, up and out, around their walls entirely. And to them, what just happened is an obscenity against the laws of nature. The dot was in a sealed room. Then the dot was gone, vanished from inside a closed box with every wall intact. Then the dot reappeared somewhere else, materializing out of nothing. There is no explanation available to them, because the explanation lives in a direction they cannot point to or even conceive. To a Flatlander, you are a miracle and a horror. You see the unseeable. You steal from sealed vaults without opening them. You could reach into the very body of a Flatlander, touch what passes for its insides, lift out whatever you found there, all without breaking its outline, all without it understanding how. You are a god by their measure. Abbott understood something more fundamental than a geometry lesson, and it is worth pausing on because it explains why his little book has outlived 1,000 more serious works. He saw that the hardest part of a higher dimension is not the mathematics, it is the imagination. His Flatlanders are not stupid. They are simply imprisoned by what they can picture, and the prison is invisible to them because its walls are made of the only directions they have ever known. When the sphere tries to explain itself to a Flatlander, describing this thing called up, this direction perpendicular to everything the Flatlander can point to, the Flatlander cannot follow, not because the idea is illogical, but because there is no room in its mind to hold it. It keeps trying to map up onto some direction it already has, north or east or a diagonal, and of course it fails, because up is none of those. The failure is not a failure of intelligence. It is a failure of available directions. And that is exactly our situation, one floor up, which is why the book is really about us. We are not too dim to picture a fourth direction. We are simply built without the axis to hold it, and our confident insistence that there is no fourth direction is the precise sound a Flatlander makes when it insists there is no up. There is a poignant turn in Abbott's story that makes this even sharper. When the sphere finally lifts the central Flatlander up off its plane and shows it the whole flat world from above, the Flatlander is overwhelmed, transformed, desperate to share the revelation. But when it returns to Flatland and tries to teach its fellows about the third dimension, it cannot make them understand, and it ends up disbelieved, even punished, for speaking of a direction no one else can find. The detail matters because it captures the real difficulty honestly. Even direct experience of a higher dimension might not be transmissible, might not survive translation back into a world that has no words and no axes for it. The knowing and the saying come apart. That is a humbling thing to hold as we go on, because it means the most we can hope to do here is reason carefully toward the edge of what can be pictured, and then trust the logic to carry us the last step that the imagination cannot. And the thing to hold on to, the thing that should send a small chill up your spine, is that you are doing nothing clever at all. You are not breaking any law. You are not exerting any strange power. You are just standing slightly to the side, in a direction they happen not to have, looking down at a world that cannot look back up at you. The whole of your apparent divinity comes from a single extra direction, freely used. That is the entire trick. And if a being with one more dimension than a Flatlander can do all of that to Flatland, then by the plainest possible logic, a being with one more dimension than you could do every bit of it to your world and to you. Hold that thought. We are going to come back to it, and when we do, it is going to be about your sealed rooms, your locked boxes, and the inside of your own body. But first, we have to do the harder thing. We have to climb the ladder ourselves and try to build, in the mind, the shape of a fourth direction. Part 4. Building a shape you cannot picture. We cannot see a fourth dimension. We have established that thoroughly, and we are not going to pretend otherwise. But the Flatlander could not see our third dimension either, and that did not leave it entirely helpless. A clever Flatlander, sitting on its flat world, could still reason toward us. It could notice a pattern in the shapes it already knew, and follow that pattern off the edge of what it could picture, trusting the logic to carry it where the eyes refused to go. That is exactly what we are going to do now. We are going to build a four-dimensional object the way a mathematician builds it, by climbing a ladder one rung at a time and trusting the pattern past the last rung we can see. Start at the very bottom with a single point. A point has no size and no dimension at all. It is just a location with nothing to it. Now take that point and slide it a certain distance in some direction and watch the trail it leaves behind. As the point moves, it sweeps out a line segment, a straight little stretch with two endpoints, one where it started and one where it stopped. That segment is one-dimensional. We made it by taking something zero-dimensional and dragging it through one direction. Remember the move, because we are going to repeat it again and again, and the move itself is the whole secret. Now, take that line segment, the whole thing, and slide it a distance in a new direction, perpendicular to the first one, off to the side. The segment sweeps out a square. You can see it happening if you picture the bottom edge of a square rising to become the top edge, with the two sides marking where the endpoints travelled. The square is two-dimensional. It has four corners and four edges, and we made it by taking the one-dimensional segment and dragging it through a second direction at right angles to the first. Same move. One dimension up. Take the square next, the whole flat tile of it, and slide it a distance in a third direction, perpendicular to both of the first two, straight up out of its own plane. The square sweeps out a cube. The bottom face rises to become the top face, and the four side faces mark the path the edges traveled. The cube is three-dimensional. It has 8 corners, 12 edges, and 6 square faces. And again, look at how we made it. We took the two-dimensional square and dragged it through a third direction at right angles to everything we had used so far. It is the same move every single time. Take the shape you have, push it in a fresh direction that is perpendicular to all the directions you have already used, and connect the start to the finish. Point to segment, segment to square, square to cube. Each step adds a dimension by the identical motion. So now ask the question the pattern is begging you to ask. What happens if we do it one more time? Take the cube, the whole solid thing, and slide it a distance in a fourth direction, perpendicular to length and width and height all at once. Connect every corner of the starting cube to the matching corner of the finishing cube. What sweeps out? A four-dimensional object. It is called a tesseract, or a hypercube, or by mathematicians, an 8-cell. And here is the thing that should make your scalp prickle. We cannot picture it. There is no fourth direction available to your imagination to push that cube into, just as there was no up for the Flatlander. The motion that built every other shape so cleanly stalls, not because the logic fails, but because the eyes give out. And yet the logic does not fail. The logic walks calmly on without us, and it can tell us, exactly and without any hand-waving, what this shape we cannot see is like. Listen to how precise it gets, even in the dark. We made the segment by moving a point, and it ended up with 2 corners. We made the square by moving the segment, and it doubled to 4 corners. We made the cube by moving the square, and it doubled again to 8 corners. So the tesseract, made by moving the cube, has 16 corners. The numbers do not get vague when we leave what we can picture. They sharpen. The tesseract has 16 corners, 32 edges, and 24 square faces. And it has one more feature, the one that strains the mind hardest, so take it slowly. The surface of a cube is made of flat squares, 6 of them, joined at right angles. The surface of a tesseract is made of whole cubes, 8 of them, joined to each other at right angles through a direction we cannot indicate. Picture that, or rather, fail to picture it honestly, which is the right response. The boundary of this object is not made of flat faces. It is made of 8 solid cubes, packed around a 4-dimensional interior, each one a perfectly ordinary cube, all of them meeting through the 4th direction in a way that has no picture. There is a way to make the bookkeeping feel a little less abstract by following the simple doubling that runs all the way up the ladder, because the pattern is so clean it almost lets you feel the shape you cannot see. Count the corners at each step. A point has 1 corner itself. Drag it to make a segment, and the 1 corner becomes 2, the start and the end. Drag the segment to make a square, and 2 corners become 4. Drag the square to make a cube, and 4 become 8. Each time you drag a shape into a new direction, you make a copy of every corner it had and connect the old to the new, so the number of corners doubles at every rung. 1, 2, 4, 8, and then 16 for the tesseract. The same doubling logic, applied to the faces and the cells, tells you everything else exactly, with no need to picture a thing. This is what it means to know a shape you cannot see. You do not hold its image. You hold the rule that builds it, and the rule is enough to answer any question you could ask about it: which corner connects to which, how many cubes meet along an edge, what its slices look like. The shape lives in the logic, fully and precisely, while the picture stays forever dark. And those 8 cubic cells deserve one more moment, because they are the part people most often get wrong. It is tempting to imagine the tesseract as a cube with some extra stuff bolted onto it, the way the famous nested cube picture suggests, a small cube somehow trapped inside a big one. That picture is a shadow, and we will see exactly why in a moment, but the truth underneath it is cleaner and stranger. The tesseract has 8 cubes for a surface, the way an ordinary cube has 6 squares for a surface, and all 8 of those cubes are equal, ordinary, undistorted cubes, each one a perfectly normal box. They are arranged around the 4-dimensional interior so that each one is a face of the whole, joined to its neighbors at right angles through the 4th direction. If you could somehow unfold a tesseract into our 3 dimensions, the way you can unfold the 6 squares of a cube into a flat cross-shaped pattern, you would get 8 cubes arranged in a particular 3-dimensional cross, which is exactly the shape the painter Salvador Dali used for his famous crucifixion, a cross made of 8 cubes, an unfolded tesseract laid out in our world. The shape has been hiding in plain sight, in a piece of art most people have seen, an honest 3-dimensional unfolding of an object none of us can fold back up. The word tesseract was given to this shape in 1888 by a British mathematician named Charles Howard Hinton, who was, by any measure, obsessed. Hinton spent years of his life trying to train his own mind to perceive the 4th dimension, convinced it could be done with enough discipline. He built sets of small cubes, each one painted and labelled, and he memorized them in their many arrangements, drilling himself on how they would stack and slice, trying to assemble in his imagination the cross-sections of a tesseract until the whole shape might somehow cohere in his mind's eye. Whether he ever truly succeeded, no one can say, and it is easy to read his story as a man chasing something the brain is simply not built to hold. But Hinton gave us more than a word. He gave us the names for the 2 new directions along the 4th axis. We have left and right, forward and back, up and down, 3 pairs for our 3 dimensions. Hinton called the 4th pair ana and kata, from Greek words meaning roughly toward and away, up from and down to, ana and kata. The 2 directions you cannot turn to face. They sound like nonsense, and they are not nonsense. They are placeholders for something real, a direction as genuine as up, that your body has no axis to rotate toward. And that is where we arrive at the end of the climb, holding a shape we built perfectly and cannot see at all. We can count its corners, list its edges, name its 8 cubic faces, and describe the motion that made it. And through all of that, the picture stays stubbornly blank. This is not a failure of the math. It is the exact sensation of standing at the edge of your own perception and feeling the logic step calmly over the edge while you cannot follow, which leaves us with a sharper version of our original question. If no one can look at this object directly, what could it possibly mean to see it at all? It turns out there are exactly 2 answers to that, 2 and no more, and we use both of them every single day without noticing. They are the shadow and the slice. Part 5. The shadow of a hypercube. If no one, not even a 4-dimensional being, can look at a 4-dimensional object directly, then the word seeing has to mean something narrower and more honest. It collapses into 2 specific methods, and the surprising thing is that we already use both of them constantly on ordinary objects, without ever thinking of them as substitutes for sight. The first method is the shadow, which a mathematician would call a projection. Let us start there, because it gives us the most famous image in this whole subject, and once you understand what you are actually looking at, that image stops being a curiosity and becomes a window. Think about an ordinary 3-dimensional object and the shadow it casts on a flat wall. Take a cube made of wire, just the edges, and hold it up in front of a lamp so its shadow falls on the wall behind it. The shadow is flat, 2-dimensional, because a shadow is what you get when you crush one whole dimension out of an object and let what remains fall onto a surface. And here is the part to notice carefully. If you turn the wire cube a certain way, its shadow is not a simple square. It is a smaller square sitting inside a larger square, with the corners of the inner connected to the corners of the outer by slanting lines. Now, you know perfectly well that the real cube has nothing smaller inside it. Every edge of a cube is the same length. Every angle is a right angle. There is no little cube nested in a big one. But the shadow shows you exactly that. A small square inside a big square joined by slanted lines, because the act of flattening one dimension distorts everything. The far face of the cube is farther from the wall, so it casts a smaller shadow, and the near face casts a larger one, and the connecting edges, which are really all equal and all perpendicular, get smeared into slanting lines. The distortion is not in the cube. It is the price of pressing a dimension flat so that a lower world can hold the image. Now climb one floor up, and the most famous picture in four-dimensional geometry falls right into your lap. A tesseract, our four-dimensional cube, casts a three-dimensional shadow, the same way an ordinary cube casts a two-dimensional one. And that three-dimensional shadow is exactly the image you have probably seen and found baffling, the one that looks like a small cube suspended inside a larger cube, with the corners of the inner cube connected to the corners of the outer cube by struts, so that between the two cubes sit 6 lopsided, trapezoid-shaped boxes. Look at that image now with everything we just learned about the wire cube's shadow, and it transforms. The inner cube is not really smaller. The 6 boxes between are not really lopsided. They are not trapezoids at all. Every one of those 8 pieces, the inner cube, the outer cube, and the 6 between, is a perfect, identical cube, equal in every edge and every angle. They look distorted, for the exact same reason the wire cube's shadow looked distorted. One whole direction, the fourth one, Anna and Kata, has been pressed flat to let our three-dimensional eyes hold the image. The inner cube only looks smaller because it sits farther away along the fourth direction, just as the far face of the wire cube cast a smaller shadow. You are looking at the 8 cubic faces of the tesseract, all 8 of them at once, flattened into a shape your mind can almost hold. And now we can do the thing that breaks people's brains, which is to set it turning, because this is where the shadow stops being a still picture and starts to move. Let me put you in front of it. You are standing in a dark room, and floating in front of you is that glowing wireframe, the small cube inside the larger cube, the struts running between them, the whole figure hanging in the black like a lantern made of light. I have just told you the truth your eyes are refusing to accept, that all 8 of those boxes are perfect equal cubes, that nothing here is really smaller or slanted, that the distortion is a kindness done to your three-dimensional sight. Now the figure begins to turn. But it does not turn the way anything you have ever seen turns. The inner cube swells. It grows, pushing outward, while the outer cube shrinks inward to meet it, and the two of them pass through each other, faces blooming open and folding shut, struts sweeping cleanly through other struts without ever colliding, the whole figure turning itself inside out and right side in, over and over, in a motion that no solid object in your world could survive. A real cube cannot pass through itself. A real box cannot turn inside out without tearing. And yet here, nothing tears, nothing breaks, nothing collides. You feel, watching it, that you are seeing something impossible, something that violates the way objects are allowed to move. But nothing impossible is happening. Nothing is passing through anything. The object is rigid. It is not bending or breaking or folding at all. It is making one single, honest, perfectly ordinary turn, the four-dimensional equivalent of slowly rotating a cube in your hands, except that the turn is happening partly in the fourth direction, partly into Anna and Kata. What you are watching is not the turn itself. It is the shadow of the turn, falling into a space too small to hold it, the same way the turning wire cube throws a shifting, swelling, distorting shadow on the wall, even though the cube in your hand is doing nothing dramatic at all. The blooming and folding and passing through is the price of flattening, paid out in motion instead of in stillness. You are seeing a rigid rotation in 4 dimensions, projected down into 3 and then projected again into the 2 of whatever screen or wall it plays on. A shadow of a shadow. And once you understand that, the impossibility drains out of it and something better takes its place, the quiet recognition that you are looking, indirectly but truly, at a real 4-dimensional object, doing a real and simple thing in a direction you will never face. That is the shadow. It is the first of the 2 ways to see a higher dimension. The second way is even stranger, and it is the one that finally tells us what a higher dimension would look like if it ever passed through the room you are in. Part 6. Objects out of nowhere. The shadow is the first way to see a higher dimension, but it has a limit. A shadow shows you the whole object at once, flattened and distorted, which is wonderful for studying the shape of a tesseract, but does not tell you what a 4-dimensional thing would look like to you if it actually showed up in your living room. For that we need the second method, and it is the one that finally answers the question in the title, because it describes what would happen if a higher dimensional object passed through the thin slice of space that you live in. That method is the cross-section, the slice, and once again Flatland makes it vivid. Go back to the flat world, and this time do not just hover above it. This time lower a 3-dimensional object down through the surface and watch what the Flatlanders see. Take a solid sphere, a ball, and bring it slowly down so that it passes through the plane of Flatland, sinking through the surface from above and continuing on below. The Flatlanders cannot see the sphere. They never can, because the sphere lives mostly in the up and down direction that does not exist for them. All they can ever see is the part of the sphere that is touching their world at any given instant, the place where the ball intersects the flat plane. And what is that intersection? When the bottom of the ball first touches the surface, the intersection is a single point. As the ball sinks lower, the surface cuts through it at a wider place, and the intersection becomes a small circle. Lower still, and the circle grows, reaching its widest when the surface passes through the ball's equator. Then, as the ball continues down and out the other side, the circle shrinks again, back to a small circle, then to a point, and then it is gone. Now stand inside Flatland, and watch that happen with Flatlander eyes, knowing nothing of spheres or of up. What do you see? Out of absolutely nothing, with no warning and no cause, a point appears. The point swells into a circle. The circle grows, smoothly, to some maximum size, hangs there for an instant, then begins to shrink, smaller and smaller, down to a point, and then it vanishes back into the nothing it came from. A solid, eternal, unchanging sphere, just passing quietly through, registers in the flat world as a circle that materializes out of empty space, grows, shrinks, and disappears, with no possible explanation available anywhere in their world. There is nothing in Flatland that could cause a circle to appear from nowhere and grow and vanish. The cause is entirely in the 3rd dimension, in the up and down motion the Flatlanders cannot see. To them, it is not geometry. It looks like magic, or like a ghost, or like a small miracle with no mechanism. And now you know exactly what is coming, because we only ever have to do one thing in this whole subject, which is to take what happens to Flatland and raise it 1 floor. Suppose a 4-dimensional object, a hypersphere, the 4-dimensional version of a ball, were to pass through our 3-dimensional space, sinking through our world from the 4th direction, the way the ball sank through the plane. We could not see the hypersphere. We never could, because it lives mostly in Ana and Kata, the 4th direction we cannot face. All we could ever see is the part of it touching our space at each instant, the place where it intersects our 3 dimensions. And that intersection is an ordinary sphere. So here is what we would witness. Out of nothing, with no warning and no cause, a point appears in the air. The point swells into a small sphere, a ball hanging there where a moment ago there was nothing. The ball grows, smoothly, to some maximum size, hangs for an instant, then begins to shrink, smaller and smaller, down to a point, and vanishes back into the nothing it came from. A solid, unchanging hypersphere, passing quietly through, would register in our world as a ball that blooms out of empty air, grows, shrinks, and disappears, with no cause anywhere in our space to explain it. There is a detail in the slice that is easy to miss and worth slowing down for because it makes the strangeness even sharper. The ball that appears in your room would not just grow and shrink. Depending on the shape of the higher dimensional object passing through, the slice could do almost anything. A hypersphere gives you a simple sphere that swells and fades, because a sphere is the same in every direction. But pass a more complicated four-dimensional shape through your space, a tesseract, say, tumbling as it goes, and the cross-section would be a solid that changes shape as it passes, a polyhedron that morphs from one form into another, growing extra faces, shifting its number of sides, transforming moment to moment with no physical cause anywhere in your world. A single rigid object, doing nothing but drifting steadily through the fourth direction, would register to you as a shape that will not hold still, a thing that flows from one form to the next as though it were alive or melting, when in truth it is as solid and unchanging as a stone. The morphing you would see is not the object changing, it is the slice moving through different parts of an object that never changes at all. Hold that against the everyday confidence you have that solid things keep their shape. That confidence is true only because, as far as we know, nothing in your world is constantly sliding through it from a fourth direction. If something were, you would have no way to tell its steady, rigid passage from genuine, causeless transformation. The two would look identical from inside the slice. A creature in Flatland watching your hand pass through its plane sees not a hand, but a set of disconnected blobs, the cross-sections of your 5 fingers that appear separately, drift, and merge into a single larger blob as the slice reaches your palm, with no way to know that these shifting, splitting, merging shapes are one solid connected hand moving through at a constant speed. What looks like chaos in the lower world is simple, rigid motion in the higher one. The lesson keeps repeating, one floor at a time. The weirdness is never in the object. It is in the mismatch between the dimension of the thing and the dimension of the eye that watches it. That is the answer. That, finally, is what a higher dimension would actually look like, not from outside, which no one can manage, but from inside, from where you are sitting, in the only way it could ever present itself to a creature trapped in 3 dimensions. It would not look like a glowing doorway. It would not look like a tunnel to another world. It would look like objects appearing out of empty air and vanishing without a trace. It would look like a shape that materializes from a single point, swells into something solid, then collapses back into nothing. It would look like the impossible made ordinary, like magic with no mechanism, precisely because the mechanism would be hidden in a direction you cannot point to. Every story you have ever heard about something appearing out of thin air, every account of an object that vanished from a sealed room and was never found, lives, in this language, as a perfect description of what a solid, higher dimensional thing looks like as it passes through the flat sheet of space you happen to inhabit. We are not saying those stories are true. We are saying that if a 4th dimension is real and something moved through it across our slice, this is exactly the shape the event would take in your eyes, this blooming and vanishing, this geometry from above that any creature inside the slice would be forced to call a miracle. Sit with how the question has quietly inverted itself. You started by asking what a higher dimension looks like, expecting either nothing or a portal. And the honest answer turns out to be that it looks like the very things people have always pointed to as evidence that the world is stranger than physics allows, the appearances and the vanishings, the objects out of nowhere. The strangeness was never outside of geometry. It was geometry, seen from the wrong number of dimensions. And we are not finished, because a hypersphere passing through is the gentle version. The cross-section trick has a darker and more intimate cousin, which is what a four-dimensional being could do not to the empty air of your room, but to the sealed boxes in it, and to the sealed box that is your own body. We touched it back in Flatland, the dot lifted from the closed square. Now it is time to bring it home. Part 7. What a four-dimensional being could do to you. Let us return to the visitor, but this time the visitor is not us looking down at Flatland. This time it is something looking down at us, a being with one more dimension than we have, standing in a direction we cannot turn toward, regarding our world the way we regarded the flat plane. We worked out, carefully, everything a three-dimensional being could do to Flatland. Every one of those powers raises one floor, and when it does, it stops being a charming puzzle and becomes something that touches your own body. So, let us be specific, almost clinical, about what such a being could do, because the specifics are stranger and steadier than any vague talk of gods or ghosts. A being above Flatland could see inside every sealed shape at once. So, a four-dimensional being could see inside every sealed, three-dimensional container in our world, all at the same time, with nothing hidden. The contents of a locked safe would lie open to it, not because it is strong enough to see through steel, but because it is looking from a direction the steel does not block. The far side of a wall, the inside of a sealed crate, the interior of a closed building, all of it would be plainly visible, the way the inside of a drawn square is plainly visible to you from above. And the same is true of your body. To a four-dimensional being, you are a closed container, and from its vantage you are not closed at all. It would see the chambers of your chest, and the coiled length of your gut, and the blood moving through you, every interior part at once, unobstructed, not by peeling back any of your surfaces, but simply by looking from the side that none of your surfaces face. Nothing about you would be inside, because inside is a fact about which directions your skin happens to block, and your skin blocks none of the directions that matter to a being standing in the fourth. It could reach in too, not just look. A three-dimensional being lifts the dot out of the sealed square without crossing a wall. A four-dimensional being could reach into a sealed box and remove what is inside without opening it, lifting the object out through the fourth direction, around all six walls at once, the way you would lift a coin off a table without sliding it through the tabletop. From your point of view, the object would simply be gone, vanished from a sealed container with every seal intact. It could reach into your closed fist and take what you were holding. It could, in principle, reach into your body and remove or repair something inside you without making a single cut, its hand entering through a direction that runs around your skin entirely, never crossing the surface at all. A surgeon who needed no incision, who could touch your appendix or your spine from a side of you that you cannot even point to. To you, it would look like the impossible. To the being, it would be no harder than you reaching into an open bowl. And then there is the strangest power of all, the one that has nothing to do with insides and everything to do with handedness. So follow this carefully, because it is genuinely beautiful. Hold up your two hands and look at them. Your left hand and your right hand are mirror images of each other. They are the same shape, reversed, and no matter how you twist or turn a left hand, you can never make it match a right hand. Turn a left glove every way you like, it never becomes a right glove. This property of being different from your own mirror image is called chirality, and it has a remarkable feature. A shape that cannot be turned into its mirror image within its own number of dimensions can be flipped into that mirror image by rotating it through one dimension higher. Picture a left footprint and a right footprint drawn on a flat page. Stuck in the plane, sliding around, you can never make one match the other. But lift one footprint off the page, Flip it over in our third dimension and lay it back down, and now it lands perfectly on its mirror twin. The flip through the higher dimension turned left into right. Now raise that one floor and feel what it means. A four-dimensional being could pick you up, rotate you through the fourth dimension, and set you back down as your own mirror image. Your pulse would now come from the right side of your chest. Every molecule in your body that had a handedness would be reversed. Every spiral in your DNA wound the other way. Your whole form flipped like that footprint, and it could be done without a single cut, without breaking your skin. The entire reversal, accomplished by a turn through Ana and Kata. You would be, in the most literal possible sense, turned into the mirror version of yourself. That is not mysticism. That is just chirality plus one extra direction, the same trick that flips a footprint, scaled up to flip a person. And yet, here is the turn that keeps all of this from being merely frightening, the part that quietly restores your dignity. For all these godlike powers over our world, the four-dimensional being labours under the very same curse you do. It has, at most, a three-dimensional retina, a sensor one dimension below its own world, so it never sees a four-dimensional object whole either. It sees three-dimensional cross-sections and shadows and infers the rest, exactly as you infer depth, exactly as the Flatlander infers a square. It can reach into your chest, but it cannot look at its own world straight on, any more than you can look at yours. The privilege of a higher dimension is enormous, and the curse of perceiving one dimension short is universal. No one, at any level, in any number of dimensions, ever sees their own world whole. Everyone is reaching for a depth they cannot directly see. So you should feel watched. Yes, watched from a side of yourself you cannot check over your shoulder for. Every private interior lying open to a gaze you cannot meet. But you should also feel something steadier underneath the unease, which is that the being, doing the watching, is, in the most basic way, in the very same situation you are, peering at flattened shadows and dreaming the solid world back into them, just one floor up. That shared limit is the floor none of us can get beneath. And it raises the question we have been circling since the start, the one we can no longer put off. Is any of this real, or is it only a beautiful game played with geometry and analogy? To answer that, we have to leave the world of pure shape and walk into physics, where the extra dimensions stopped being a thought experiment and started being something the equations of the real universe seem to demand. Part 8. The fifth dimension that became light. Everything we have done so far has been geometry and analogy, a careful game played with shapes and shadows and flat worlds. It is a beautiful game, and it is logically airtight, but a fair person listening to it has every right to ask the hard question, so what? The mathematics of a fourth dimension hangs together perfectly, but does physical space actually have one? Is there a real fourth direction threaded through this room, or have we just built an elegant castle out of pure logic with no ground under it? This is the right question, and the honest answer is that we do not know for certain. But the reason physicists take the question seriously, the reason it is not idle, is that again and again, when they add an extra dimension to the equations that describe the real universe, the universe gets simpler, not more complicated. The extra room does work. It explains things. And the first and cleanest example of that is more than 100 years old, and it is so strange that it still has the power to stop you in your tracks. The year was 1919, and a little-known German mathematician named Theodor Kaluza was working through an idea so odd he was almost embarrassed by it. Albert Einstein had, just a few years earlier, completed his masterpiece, the general theory of relativity, which revealed that gravity is not a force in the old sense, but the curvature of four-dimensional space-time, 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time, bending around matter. It was the most successful description of gravity ever written. Kaluza asked a question that sounds almost childishly simple. What if you took Einstein's equations for gravity and wrote them not in 4 dimensions but in 5? One extra dimension of space added on, and gravity allowed to curve and ripple through all of it. What would the equations say then? What they said was almost eerie, and it is worth slowing all the way down for, because this is one of the genuinely uncanny moments in the history of science. When Kaluza worked through 5-dimensional gravity and then separated the result back out into the 4 dimensions we experience, 2 things fell out of the equations at once. The first was ordinary 4-dimensional gravity, exactly as Einstein had written it, unchanged. That was expected. But alongside it, with no extra assumptions, no fudging, no inputs added by hand, came a second set of equations, complete and perfect, and they were Maxwell's equations, the equations of electricity and magnetism, the equations that govern every light, every motor, every radio wave, every nerve impulse in your body. Electromagnetism, the force that lights your screen and binds your atoms together, fell out of pure gravity the moment you let gravity have a 5th dimension to move in. 2 forces that had seemed to have nothing whatsoever to do with each other, gravity and electromagnetism, turned out to be a single thing, gravity in 5 dimensions, seen from a world that can only perceive 4. The light reaching your eyes, in this picture, is gravity rippling in a direction you cannot see. Einstein, when Kaluza sent him the idea, was rattled by it. He sat on the letter for 2 years, drawn to its beauty and troubled by its strangeness, before finally helping Kaluza publish. And the strangeness has an obvious sticking point, the same one a child would raise. If there is a 5th dimension, where is it? Why can you not point to it, walk into it, fall down it? If electromagnetism is gravity rippling in an extra direction, that direction ought to be somewhere, and we ought to be able to find it. The answer came in 1926 from a Swedish physicist named Oskar Klein, and his answer is the idea that has governed almost all serious thinking about extra dimensions from that day to this. Klein proposed that the 5th dimension is real, but that it is rolled up, curled so tightly upon itself that it is far too small to notice. He called this compactification, and there is a perfect everyday picture for it. Imagine a garden hose stretched across a field, and you are standing far away looking at it. From across the field, the hose looks like a line, a 1-dimensional thread lying on the grass. You would swear it has only length, but walk up close and you see what distance hid from you. The hose is not a line at all. It is a tube, and wrapped around it, at every point along its length, is a 2nd dimension, a little circle, the circular direction an ant could crawl around if it walked around the surface of the hose. From far away, that circular direction is invisible, squashed below notice. Up close it is plainly, obviously there. Klein's claim was that our space is like that hose seen from far away. At every single point of what you call empty space, there is an extra direction curled into a tiny circle, a loop so small that nothing you could ever do would reveal it. How small? On the order of 10 to the minus 35 meters, near the very smallest length that physics speaks of at all, a length so far below the size of an atom that the comparison is almost meaningless. The dimension is everywhere. It is threaded through this room, curled up at every point of the air in front of your face, wound tighter than any instrument humanity has ever built could probe. You cannot point to it not because it is far away, but because it is rolled up impossibly small, right here, everywhere, all at once. It is worth dwelling on just how unmotivated Kaluza's success was, because that is what gives it weight. He did not set out to produce electromagnetism. He was not tuning his equations to deliver Maxwell's laws as the answer he wanted. He simply asked what gravity would look like in one more dimension, turned the mathematical crank honestly, and electromagnetism came out the other side as an unrequested gift. In science, that kind of unearned bonus is the thing that makes people sit up, because a theory that only ever gives back exactly what you put into it has told you nothing new, while a theory that hands you something you were not looking for, something true and independently confirmed, has touched on something real. Maxwell's equations were already known, already tested, already the bedrock of every electrical device. For them to fall unbidden out of five-dimensional gravity was not a coincidence anyone could wave away. It was a hint, written in the most precise language we have, that a hidden direction might be doing real work in holding the universe together. The garden hose picture is so useful that it is worth turning over once more, because it answers the next objection before you raise it. You might ask how a dimension can be both real and unwalkable, both there and not there. The hose answers it. The circular direction around the hose is completely real. An ant on the surface can walk around it, can travel in that direction, can come back to where it started by going around. It is a genuine direction, with genuine room in it, and yet from any distance at all, it is utterly invisible, contributing nothing to the hose's apparent shape, which looks like a simple line. Largeness and smallness, here, are not about whether a dimension exists. They are about how far you can travel in it before you return to your starting point. In a curled dimension, you can travel only an impossibly tiny distance before you loop all the way around and come back. So small a loop that nothing can fit into it and no instrument can resolve it. The dimension is real and traversable and present at every point, and also so tightly wound that for all practical purposes it might as well not be there. Real and hidden are not opposites. A curled dimension is both at once, which is exactly what lets the universe keep one threaded invisibly through every point of the space around you. Kaluza and Klein's theory was set aside for decades, partly because the curled dimension seemed untestable, and partly because physics got busy with other revolutions. But it never quite died, because the thing it had done was too beautiful to forget. It had taken two unrelated forces and shown them to be one by the single act of adding a hidden direction. And when, much later, physicists set out to build the most ambitious theory in the history of the field, a theory that would unite all the forces and all the particles into one mathematical structure, they found that the only way to make it work was to do exactly what Kaluza had done, only far more so. They had to add not one hidden dimension, but 6. And the place those 6 dimensions went, the shape they curled themselves into, turns out to be the most vertiginous idea in this entire story. Part 9. The folded garden at every point of space. When physicists in the late 20th century reached for a theory that could finally unite gravity with quantum mechanics, the two great descriptions of reality that stubbornly refused to fit together, the most developed candidate they found made a demand that would have sounded like madness in any other context. The theory is called string theory, and its central idea is that the smallest things in the universe are not point-like particles, but tiny vibrating strands, strings whose different notes of vibration appear to us as the different particles. It is an elegant idea, but string theory only works. The mathematics only holds together and stops producing nonsense if the universe has more than 3 dimensions of space. A lot more. In its standard form, string theory requires 10 dimensions in total, 9 of space and 1 of time. Its richer and more complete cousin, called M-theory, requires 11. We plainly see 3 large dimensions of space. So the theory owes us an account of the other 6, and the account is Kaluza and Klein's old idea raised to a higher power and made stranger. The 6 extra dimensions, string theory says, are compactified, curled up small at every point of space, exactly as Klein curled his single 5th dimension into a circle. But 6 dimensions cannot curl into something as simple as a circle. They wind themselves into an intricate, folded, six-dimensional shape, a knotted geometry with holes and handles and twists. And these shapes have a name. They are called Calabi-Yau manifolds, after the mathematicians Eugenio Calabi and Xingtung Yau, who had studied these shapes for entirely abstract reasons, as pure mathematics, long before physics came looking for them. In 1985, 4 physicists, Philip Candelas, Gary Horowitz, Andrew Strominger, and Edward Witten, showed that if you curl string theory's 6 extra dimensions into a Calabi-Yau shape, the result preserves exactly the features the real world needs: the handedness of particles, a delicate balance called supersymmetry, the right kind of structure to reproduce something resembling the physics we actually observe. The abstract shapes the mathematicians had built for their own reasons turned out to be the shapes physics needed to hide its extra dimensions. Let me bring this all the way down to where you are sitting, because the picture it paints is the most dizzying thing in the subject, and it deserves to be felt and not just stated. Look at a patch of empty air in front of you. Nothing there, you would say. Now begin to magnify it in your mind by factor after factor. Push past the dust, past the drifting molecules of the air, past individual atoms, each one already mostly empty space, and keep going, down and down, by factors of 10 so numerous that you lose count, until you reach a scale almost unimaginably small, near the smallest length physics will even discuss. And string theory's claim is that here, at this point, the point you have been diving into, there is not nothing. There is a tiny, elaborately folded garden of 6 extra dimensions, curled and knotted into that Calabi-Yau shape, far too small to ever see. And it is not just at this point, it is at every point. The same intricate 6-dimensional shape, repeated at every single location in the room, stamped into the floor of reality infinitely, so that the empty air around you is not empty at all but densely, secretly textured, every cubic inch of it threaded through with curled-up directions you can never enter. The emptiness was never empty. It was just wound up too small to see. And now the part that should make your skin prickle, because it is not only that these hidden gardens exist, it is what they do. The precise shape of that 6-dimensional folding, string theory says, determines the laws of physics in our 3 big dimensions. The number of kinds of particles, the masses they have, the strengths of the forces, the very contents and rules of reality, all of it would be a consequence of exactly how those 6 dimensions are knotted at every point of space. Change the folding, and you change the weight of an electron. Change it more, and you change which forces exist. The handwriting of the universe, in this picture, is the shape of a thing curled up smaller than anything you will ever touch, written identically at every point of the air in front of your face. The reason anything in your world is the way it is, the reason light moves as it does and matter holds together as it does, would be inscribed in the folds of a hidden garden you can never visit. It is staggering, and string theory pays for that beauty with a profound embarrassment, one it has never resolved, and honesty requires that we say so plainly. There is not one possible Calabi-Yau shape. There are many. Tens of thousands were known almost immediately, and the full set of consistent possibilities is now estimated at something like 10 to the 500th, a number so enormous it makes the count of every atom in the observable universe look like nothing. And string theory offers no known principle to tell us which of those countless shapes is the one we actually live in. It can say, with great elegance, that the laws of physics are written in the folding of 6 hidden dimensions. It cannot yet say which folding is ours, out of a number of options beyond all comprehension, so we are left holding an answer that is at once the grandest in the subject and the most frustrating. What does a higher dimension look like, according to string theory? It looks like a folded garden at every point of empty space, a garden whose shape secretly writes the laws you live by, and a garden we cannot yet identify out of an ocean of possibilities. The extra dimensions are right here, threaded through everything, and also, maddeningly, beyond our reach to pin down. Which raises the obvious next question. If the dimensions are too small to see, is there any version of this idea where they might be big enough to find, big enough, even, to hide another world? There is, and it is the closest that disciplined physics ever comes to the dream of an alternate reality a hair's breadth away. Part 10. A world a hair away. For most of the 20th century, everyone working on extra dimensions assumed they had to be unimaginably tiny, curled near that smallest length we keep returning to, because the reasoning seemed obvious. If an extra dimension were large, surely we would have noticed it. Surely we would have fallen down it or seen things disappear into it. So the dimensions, if they existed, had to be wound up small enough to escape every observation. In 1998, 3 physicists turned that assumption completely over. And in doing so, they produced the closest thing real physics has to the science fiction dream of other worlds. Their names were Nima Arkani Hamed, Savas Dimopoulos, and Gia Dvali, and their proposal is known by their initials, the ADD model. To understand what they did, you have to start with a puzzle that had bothered physicists for a long time, a puzzle hiding in plain sight in the most ordinary experience. Consider how absurdly weak gravity is. This sounds wrong at first, because gravity feels powerful. It holds you to the planet. It governs the orbits of worlds. But think about a small magnet, the kind that holds a note to a refrigerator. That tiny magnet, with its tiny electromagnetic force, holds a metal paperclip up against the pull of the entire Earth. The whole mass of the planet, pulling down with all its gravity, loses to a magnet you could close in your fist. Gravity, measured honestly against the other forces, is not just weak. It is weaker than the others by a factor so enormous it is almost comical, a number with dozens of zeros in it. Why? Why is gravity so absurdly, ridiculously feeble compared to electromagnetism and the forces inside the atom? This is called the hierarchy problem, and it had no good answer. Arkani Hamed, Dimopoulos, and Dvali offered a startling one. What if gravity is not actually weak at all? What if gravity is just as strong as the other forces, but it looks weak to us because it is the one force that leaks out of our 3 dimensions and spreads into extra ones? Imagine the full strength of gravity being diluted, spread thin, as it bleeds into directions we cannot follow, while the forces we know stay trapped in our 3 dimensions, undiluted and strong. If that were true, then we would only ever feel the watered-down remainder of gravity, the part that has not leaked away, and it would seem feeble to us, not because it is feeble, but because most of it has gone somewhere we cannot look. And here is the consequence that made the idea explosive. For gravity to be diluted by exactly the right amount to explain its weakness, the extra dimensions it leaks into do not have to be tiny. They could be as large as a fraction of a millimeter, almost big enough to see, and we would still never have noticed them, for one specific and beautiful reason. That reason is the strangest twist in the whole modern picture, and it is called the brane-world, so let us build it carefully. In this scenario, our entire universe, everything in it, every particle of matter, every ray of light, every star and planet, you and your body and the floor under your feet, is stuck to a 3-dimensional sheet, a membrane floating in a space of higher dimensions. Physicists call the membrane a brane, short for membrane, and they call the larger space it floats in the bulk. The key fact, the fact that makes everything click into place, is that the things we are made of cannot leave the brain. Light cannot leave it. Matter cannot leave it. The particles that make up you and everything you have ever seen are bound to that 3-dimensional sheet as surely as a flatlander is bound to its plane, unable to rise off it into the up that does not exist for them. We are painted onto our brain, and that is why we perceive only 3 dimensions even if the bulk around us has more. We never see the extra room because we cannot enter it, and neither can our light. So it is invisible to every instrument that relies on light or matter, which is all of them. Only one thing is free to cross the bulk, only gravity. Gravity, alone among the forces, is not confined to the brain but reaches out into the full higher dimensional space, which is exactly why, in this picture, it gets diluted and looks weak. And in 1999, the year after ADD, 2 more physicists, Lisa Randall and Raman Sundram, found an even more elegant version in which a single extra dimension is warped, stretched by gravity so severely that distances and energies shrink exponentially as you move across it, solving the hierarchy problem with one curled and warped dimension rather than several large flat ones. The details differ, but the core of the brain world is the same in all of them. Our whole universe is a membrane, and there is room around it that we cannot enter. And now the phrase from the title of this video, the one about alternate realities, earns itself honestly, so listen carefully to exactly what the physics does and does not say. If our universe is one membrane floating in the bulk, then there is nothing in the physics that forbids other membranes, other brains, other 3-dimensional worlds floating in the same higher dimensional space parallel to ours, perhaps only a fraction of a millimeter away across the bulk. A whole other world with its own matter and its own light and possibly its own structure could be hanging right there, closer to you than the thickness of a sheet of paper, separated from you, not by any distance you could ever walk, but by a direction your body cannot turn to face. You could never see it, because its light cannot cross the gap to you and yours cannot cross to it. You could never travel there, because you are painted onto your own brain and cannot leave. The only thing that could ever reach across the gap, the only whisper that could pass between 2 neighboring worlds, is gravity. There is a thought here that can keep you up at night, in the best way, if you let it settle. The other brain, if it exists, would not be far. We are used to thinking that anything we cannot reach must be distant, light years away across the gulfs of space, which is why the loneliness of the cosmos feels like a problem of distance. But a neighboring brain breaks that intuition completely. It would not be far, in any direction you could measure, with a ruler laid along our 3 dimensions. It would be near, nearer than the wall across the room, nearer than the page or screen in front of you, separated by a gap measured in a direction that does not lie along any of our axes at all. Distance, in the ordinary sense, would not even be the right word for the separation. You and another entire world could occupy the same apparent place, overlapping in all 3 of the dimensions you can measure, and still be utterly cut off, because the true gap between you runs along Ana and Kata, the directions you cannot face. Closeness and unreachability, which always felt like opposites, would collapse into the same fact. And the only thread that could ever cross that gap, gravity, is precisely the force that has always seemed slightly out of place in physics, the one that refuses to fit with the others, the one that is mysteriously, absurdly weak. The brain world offers a single idea that ties those loose ends together. Gravity is weak because it is not confined like the others, and it is not confined because it alone reaches into the bulk. And because it reaches into the bulk, it is the one messenger that could carry any whisper between neighboring worlds. Some physicists have wondered, seriously and on the record, whether the unexplained extra gravity we attribute to dark matter, the invisible stuff whose pull holds galaxies together, but which gives off no light, might in part be the gravitational shadow of matter on another brain, its weight reaching across the bulk into our world, while its light stays trapped on its own sheet. That is speculation, clearly labelled, not established fact. But it is the kind of speculation that follows naturally from the picture, and it shows how a single idea about hidden directions can reach all the way from pure geometry to the largest unsolved puzzles in the sky. Be careful with what this is, because it is easy to let it slide into fantasy, and the honest version is stranger and better than the fantasy. This is not a parallel universe in the science fiction sense, not another timeline where you made different choices, not a mystical realm of spirits. It is a real, physical, three-dimensional world made of ordinary matter and ordinary light that happens to sit beside ours in a direction we have no access to point along, close enough to touch, and forever out of reach for everything except gravity. That is the disciplined, equation-grounded version of an alternate reality a hair's breadth away, not a portal. A neighbor, separated from you by Ana and Kata, by the one direction you cannot face, present and untouchable at once. It is a beautiful idea, maybe the most beautiful in modern physics. And now we have to do the hardest and most honest thing in this whole video, which is to ask whether any of it is true, and to face squarely what the experiments have actually found when they went looking for the extra room. Part 11. Everything we tried and found nothing. A topic this seductive needs a cold counterweight, and you deserve the honest one, because a story about hidden worlds, a hair's breadth away, is exactly the kind of story that can run far ahead of its evidence if no one holds the line. So let us hold it. For all the elegance of extra dimensions, for all the beauty of Kaluza's unification, and string theory's folded gardens, and the brane-worlds' untouchable neighbours, there is at this moment not one shred of direct, experimental evidence that any extra dimension exists. None. And it is not for lack of looking. The searches have been serious, ingenious, and sustained, carried out by some of the most careful experimenters alive, and every one of them has come back empty. That fact deserves to sit in the room with all the wonder, because a channel that only sold you the wonder would be lying to you. Start with gravity, because the brain world made a specific, testable promise. If gravity really leaks into a large extra dimension, then at very short distances its behavior should change. Gravity, as everyone learns, follows an inverse square law. Move twice as far from a mass, and its pull weakens to a quarter, 3 times as far, and it weakens to a ninth, the strength falling off with the square of the distance. That law has been confirmed across enormous scales, from falling apples to orbiting planets. But if gravity were leaking into an extra dimension, then at distances small enough to feel that extra room, the law should break. The pull should weaken faster than the square of the distance, because the gravity would be spreading into more directions than 3. So there is a clean test. Measure gravity at smaller and smaller separations, and watch for the moment the inverse square law fails. If it fails, you have found an extra dimension. If it holds, you have ruled one out, at least at that size. A group at the University of Washington called the Eote-Wash Group has spent years doing exactly this, and their instruments are marvels of patience. They use what is called a torsion balance, essentially a delicate pendulum that twists in response to the faint gravitational tug between small, carefully shaped masses held a tiny distance apart, close enough that an extra dimension, if it were large, would reveal itself. They have measured the pull of gravity between objects separated by less than a millimeter, pushing the test down to separations of around 50 microns, a distance finer than the width of a human hair. And across all of it, gravity has held perfectly to the inverse square law. No deviation, no sign of leaking, no hint of an extra dimension at that scale. The large extra dimensions that the brain world allowed have been ruled out, step by careful step, down to a size finer than a hair, by an experiment patient enough to feel gravity tug across a gap you could barely see. Then there is the other end, the realm of the very small and the very energetic, where the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland smashes protons together at energies never before reached on Earth. Several extra-dimension models made predictions for what such collisions might produce. They predicted heavy echoes of the graviton, the hypothetical particle of gravity, showing up as new particles called Kaluza-Klein modes, the signature of gravity vibrating in a curled extra dimension. They predicted energy going missing from collisions, carried off into the bulk by gravity escaping our brain. Some of the bolder, large-dimension scenarios even predicted that colliding protons at high enough energy might create microscopic black holes, tiny and harmless and instantly evaporating, but unmistakable if they appeared. Physicists looked for every one of these signatures carefully across years of data and trillions of collisions. They found none of them, no Kaluza-Klein gravitons, with the limits now pushed past several trillion electron volts. No missing energy signal of the right kind. No microscopic black holes, not one. Every search for the fingerprints of extra dimensions at the highest energies we can reach has come back empty-handed. There is a genuine worry hiding inside these null results, and a careful person should name it rather than hide it. A theory earns its place in science by sticking its neck out, by predicting something specific that could fail, so that an experiment can in principle prove it wrong. The trouble with extra dimensions wound up near the smallest length physics can speak of is that they predict almost nothing we could ever check. If the dimensions are that small, no collider we could build, even one circling the entire planet, would have the energy to feel them. The theory would then describe a real feature of the universe, while making no testable promise about it, which puts it in an uncomfortable place, beautiful and unfalsifiable at once, more like a mathematical possibility than a tested fact. Some physicists find that acceptable, arguing that internal consistency and the unification of the forces are reasons enough to take the idea seriously. Others find it troubling, a sign that the field has wandered somewhere experiment cannot follow. Both camps are being honest, and the disagreement itself is healthy, because it is the sound of science arguing about where the boundary of science actually lies. What matters for you, listening, is that nobody serious is claiming the extra dimensions have been found. The strongest honest statement is that our best theories keep suggesting them, the experiments keep not finding them, and reasonable people differ about what that silence means. So, what do we make of that? It would be wrong to conclude that extra dimensions are dead, and it would be just as wrong to wave the failures away. The fair reading is humbler and more interesting than either. Nature is under no obligation to make its extra dimensions convenient for us. The compactified dimensions of Kaluza and Klein and string theory may simply be so small, wound near that 10 to the minus 35 meter scale, that no machine we could ever conceivably build would reach them, in which case the most beautiful idea in physics could be real and permanently beyond proof, true and forever unconfirmable. The large and warped versions, the ones generous enough to allow a neighbor a hair away, are being squeezed from every direction by these null results, though clever variants keep surviving in the narrowing gaps. There is even a recent proposal called the dark dimension, suggesting a single extra dimension of about a micron in size, tied to the unsolved mysteries of dark energy and dark matter, and observers are taking it seriously enough to design real tests for it. The question is genuinely open, and it is alive. But the posture that honesty demands, the one we hold to here, is this. Higher dimensions are a serious, well-motivated, and possibly correct idea, an idea that our very best theories of gravity and matter keep proposing to us, almost insisting on, whenever we push them to their limits. And at the very same time, they are an idea for which we have, so far, not a single confirmed sighting. Both things are true at once, and you have to hold them together. The equations keep handing us extra room. The experiments keep finding none. The universe owes us no hidden directions, no folded gardens, no neighbor a hair away, and to this day it has not shown us any. That tension between what the mathematics suggests and what the instruments can find is the real and unfinished state of the question, and sitting inside it honestly is more interesting than pretending it is settled in either direction. And strangely, the place where the question does have a complete and certain answer is not in any laboratory at all. It is in pure mathematics, where dimensions can be added without limit and their shape worked out exactly, and where the answer to what a higher dimension looks like turns out to be the most counterintuitive thing we have found yet. Part 12. The room that empties as it grows. There is one place where the question we started with has a complete, exact, and certain answer, a place where no experiment is needed and no doubt remains, and that place is pure mathematics. In mathematics, dimensions are not a thing you have to find in nature. They are a thing you can simply add, one after another, without limit, and then calculate the properties of whatever lives in them with total precision. And when mathematicians do this, when they build higher dimensional space in the only place it can be built perfectly, and then look carefully at what they have made, the answer to what a higher dimension looks like turns out to overturn the single most basic intuition you have been carrying this entire time, the quiet assumption underneath everything, which is that more dimensions would mean more room. Start with something that should reassure you, because four-dimensional space turns out to be, in one specific way, the most beautiful of all. Think about the most perfectly regular shapes in each dimension, the shapes where every face is identical and every corner is the same, the most symmetric objects that can exist. In 2 dimensions, these are the regular polygons, and there are infinitely many of them: the equilateral triangle, the square, the regular pentagon, the hexagon, on and on forever. In our 3 dimensions, the perfectly regular solids are far rarer. There are exactly 5 of them: the shapes the ancient Greeks held sacred, the tetrahedron, the cube, the octahedron, the dodecahedron, and the icosahedron. Just 5 in all of 3-dimensional space. You might reasonably expect that as you go up in dimension, the count keeps shrinking, or maybe holds steady. It does neither. In 4 dimensions, there are 6 perfectly regular shapes, called the regular 4 polytopes, one more than we have in 3. And then, in 5 dimensions, and in 6, and in every dimension above that, forever, there are only ever 3. 4 dimensions is the peak. It is the single richest dimension for perfect symmetry, with more regular shapes than the space below it, and more than every space above it, an infinite tower of sparser dimensions, stretching up from a high point that sits just 1 floor above your head. And one of those 6 4-dimensional shapes is a genuine orphan, a shape with no relative anywhere else. 5 of the 6 are cousins of our familiar solids: the 4-dimensional version of the cube, which is our tesseract, the 4-dimensional version of the tetrahedron, and so on. But the 6th, called the 24 cell, has no 3-dimensional analogue at all. It is a flawless, perfectly regular object, built from 24 8-sided pieces fitted together, and it exists in 4 dimensions and nowhere else. There is no smaller version of it in our world to point to, no shadow of it among the Greek solids, no reflection of it down here. It is a perfect form that simply has no counterpart in any dimension but its own, a shape that begins and ends in 4 dimensions, beautiful and unreachable, the kind of thing that exists only because the 4th dimension is roomy enough in symmetry to hold it, and no other dimension is. But now comes the reversal, the one that takes the most stubborn intuition you own and turns it inside out. So let me walk you into it slowly, and let the mathematics betray your expectation in front of you. Imagine walking forward into space that gains a dimension with every step you take. First an ordinary room, 3 dimensions, the space you know, then a 4-dimensional room, then 5, then 6, climbing higher with each stride. Your intuition has a confident prediction about this walk. It says that each new dimension is more room, more space to move, a grander and larger hall opening around you, because that is what adding a direction has always meant down here. Now carry with you, on this walk, a simple test object, a ball of fixed reach, radius 1, and watch how much space it actually contains as the dimensions climb. In 1 dimension, the ball is just a segment, and its size is 2. In 2 dimensions, it is a disk, with an area of about 3. In 3 dimensions, it is the familiar sphere, holding a volume of about 4. And it keeps growing for a little while, up to about 5 in the 4th dimension and a touch more in the 5th. Your intuition seems to be winning. More dimensions, more volume, more room, and then it stops. At the 5th dimension, the volume of that unit ball reaches its maximum, around 5 1/4, and then, as you keep walking, as you add the 6th dimension and the 7th and beyond, the volume begins to fall. Not level off, fall. It shrinks, dimension after dimension, dropping steadily towards 0, so that a ball of radius 1 in a space of 100 dimensions contains essentially no volume at all, almost nothing, a whisper of space where you expected a cathedral. The reason traces back, of all things, to the humble value of pi, a little more than 3, which tips the balance in the formula right around the 5th dimension and sends the volume into its long decline. Add more directions, and the ball holds less. The room you were promised does not arrive. It evaporates, and it gets stranger still, because you should ask where the little volume that remains has actually gone, and the answer is the final overturning. In high-dimensional space, almost all of the volume of a ball is not spread through its middle, where you are standing. It crowds into an impossibly thin shell, just beneath the surface, an outer skin so thin and so dominant that the entire interior is very nearly empty. And in a high-dimensional cube, almost all the volume flees outward into the corners, far from the center, so that a ball tucked snugly inside the cube fills a vanishing fraction of it, and the cube becomes, in effect, a spray of distant spiky corners around a hollow core. This is called the concentration of measure, and what it means for our walk is devastating to the intuition. Higher dimensional space is not a grander version of home. It is emptier, thinner, more hollow, the higher you climb. Nearly everything that exists in it hugs the walls and the corners and the surfaces, and the middle, where a creature would stand, is a void. The grandeur you imagined, the wide-open extra room, was your own 3-dimensional wish, projected onto a place that does not work that way at all. More dimensions does not mean more space to live in. It means a wide, thin, hollow strangeness, where the center empties out and everything real flees to the edges. The honest mathematical answer to what a higher dimension looks like is not bigger. It is emptier and stranger and lonelier than anything your intuition was prepared to offer. And that leaves us with one last turn, the strangest of all, where even the dimensions we are certain we have might not be what they seem. Part 13. You are already the flat creature. We have spent this whole journey reaching upward, trying to climb toward a higher dimension, building it out of analogy and shadow and slice, chasing it through the equations of Kaluza and the folded gardens of string theory and the membrane worlds floating in the bulk. We have treated the extra dimension as something above us, something hidden and out of reach that we are straining to find. And now, at the very end, the most radical idea in the subject turns that whole effort upside down, because it suggests that the problem was never finding an extra dimension to add. The problem might be that one of the dimensions we already have, one we take completely for granted, is not what we think it is. In 1997, a physicist named Juan Mulder-Senna discovered something that has reshaped how physicists think about space itself. He found a precise, exact mathematical equivalence, now called the holographic correspondence, between two descriptions of the same physics that have different numbers of dimensions. On one side, there is a theory of gravity living inside a region of space, in the full three-dimensional interior of it, the part physicists call the bulk. On the other side, there is a completely different theory, one with no gravity at all, living only on the boundary surface of that region, a surface with one fewer dimension. And here is the staggering part. The two descriptions are exactly equivalent. They contain the same information. Every event happening in the higher dimensional interior is encoded perfectly and completely in the physics on the lower dimensional boundary, the way a flat holographic plate stores all the information needed to reconstruct a three-dimensional image floating above it. The interior, with its extra dimension of depth, can be fully reconstructed from data living on a surface that has one dimension less. This is the holographic principle, and notice how completely it cuts against everything we have been assuming. All this time, we have treated the extra dimension as something hidden and curled and hard to find, something we have to add to our three. But here, the extra dimension is not added at all. It emerges. The depth of the interior, the very thing that makes the bulk three-dimensional rather than two, arises out of and is entirely contained within information that lives on a lower dimensional surface. The dimension is not fundamental. It is a kind of projection, a richness woven out of data on a boundary. And if our own universe works this way, and there are serious reasons to think the principle is telling us something true, then the three-dimensional depth you take for granted, the depth your brain works so hard to reconstruct from those flat images on the backs of your eyes, might itself be the projection. The solidity around you might be a hologram, woven out of information living on some distant surface with one dimension fewer than the world it produces. The most fundamental dimension in this whole story might turn out to be the one you thought was the most ordinary thing about being alive, the plain depth of the room you are sitting in. And that brings us back, all the way back, to where we began, to the shadows behind your eyes, because the circle now closes. We started with a single uncomfortable fact, that you have never directly seen three dimensions, that the solid world is a reconstruction your brain assembles from flat images. We treated that, at first, as a limitation, a sad little fact about the poverty of human sight. But look at what it has become by the end of the journey. It means that you already know, in your own body, exactly what it is to be a flat creature, inferring a world it cannot look at straight on. You have been that creature your entire life. The Flatlander, trapped on its plane, unable to see the third dimension, reconstructing its neighbours from edges and brightness, helpless before a visitor from above, that Flatlander was never a stranger. It was a portrait of you, drawn one dimension down, so you could finally recognise yourself. You are the one staring at flattened shadows and calling them solid. You always were. So let us ask the question in the title one final time, now that we have everything we need to answer it, and let the answer be quiet, the way the truest things usually are. What does a higher dimension actually look like? It does not look like a portal, or a glowing tunnel, or another world hanging in the sky. To a creature inside our slice of space, it would look like objects blooming out of empty air and vanishing without a trace, like the inside of every sealed thing lying open, like a direction that is provably perpendicular to length and width and height, and that no body built like yours could ever turn to face. It might be wound up, smaller than an atom, at every point of the air in front of you, threaded invisibly through this entire room, the curled handwriting of the laws you live by. It might be the gap across which another whole world hangs a hair's breadth away, present and untouchable, reachable by nothing but gravity. It might be a place far emptier than ours, hollowing toward its centre, everything real fleeing to its distant edges. Or it might be that the depth you already live in was the projection all along, and you are standing inside the very thing you went looking for. Think about what this circle has done to the word strange. We began by treating a higher dimension as the strange thing, and ourselves as the ordinary observers, standing on solid ground, asking about a curiosity out there. And one step at a time, the strangeness has migrated inward until it turns out to be sitting in us. The truly strange thing was never the fourth dimension. It was that we walk around utterly convinced we see a solid world when we receive only flat shadows. It was that the depth we trust most might itself be a projection. It was that privacy and enclosure, the very idea of an inside, are not laws of reality, but accidents of which directions our surfaces happen to block. It was that more room can mean less space, that adding directions can hollow a world out rather than fill it. The higher dimension was just the doorway. Walking through it, what we actually found, again and again, was ourselves, seen freshly, our most basic assumptions about space and sight and solidity quietly turned over. The subject pretends to be about geometry far away. It is really about the strangeness of being a perceiving creature at all, in any number of dimensions, always one step behind the world it is trying to see. And there is a strange comfort folded into that, if you reach for it. To be a creature that infers rather than sees, that builds its world from shadows and clues, is not a defect peculiar to you. It is the universal condition of anything that perceives, at every level we have been able to imagine, from the Flatlander to you, to the four-dimensional being who could reach into your chest and still cannot see its own world whole. No one gets to stand outside their own dimension and look at reality bare. Everyone is inside the slice, reading the cross-sections, dreaming the solid back into the flat. That shared limit is not a prison so much as a kinship, a thing every possible mind has in common, the gentle, universal fact that to perceive at all is to perceive a little less than there is. You are in good company in your blindness. You are in the only company there is. But whatever it is, here is the thing to carry with you into the dark tonight, the thing that should stay after everything else has faded. A fourth direction, if it exists, is not a faraway kingdom you would have to travel to reach. It is not somewhere else. It would be right here, perpendicular to everything, running through the chair you are sitting in and the space in front of your face and the gaps inside every solid thing around you. And the only reason you cannot see it, the only reason you cannot turn and look, is the same reason a drawing cannot climb off its page. You were built to look the other way. The strangest thing about higher dimensions was never how alien they are. It is how much of one you already are, a flat creature dreaming a solid world, separated from the next direction, out by nothing at all except the shape of the eyes you were given. Rest there for a while. The fourth direction is not above you, or beyond you, or lost in some distant reach of space. If it is anywhere, it is here, in the room, in the one direction you were simply never made to face. And now, let the thought settle, and let yourself drift.